You won't find Greyhaven Ridge on a map today. It's not there, not on satellite imagery, not in the Virginia property archives, not in the county plats redrawn after the Civil War, but we know it existed. Not because of what's visible, but because of what keeps being erased in the 1836 land tax rolls. Greyhaven was listed as a permissive settlement zone, a term used for religiously affiliated communities allowed to claim and occupy land outside formal state surveying districts. These zones were usually plotted on marginal land, ridgelines, floodplains, coal spoil, places the state didn't want but couldn't stop people from inhabiting. Greyhaven was one of these places, built into the shale of Russell County's eastern ridge, hemmed in by ancient pine, fog-wet soil, and deer trails no hunter ever admitted to walking twice. According to the 1837 Valley Watch Almanac, the population peaked at just under 300. Loggers, masons, widowed mothers, and those referred to as bonded to the cloth. These bonded citizens were associated with St. Lilian Monastery, an unmarked religious site founded by Mother Eliza Dunwich and maintained by the self-styled Silent Order of the Folded Mercy. No mail routes, no registered postmaster, no rail extension, only one road. Ridgeline 3 to be known to locals as the Tongue. Locals say the town breathed like a body, quiet, distant, and always turning inward. Houses were built with no windows facing the monastery. Doors opened away from the chapel spire, and every home kept a single chair facing east, in case the sisters came back through. As one oral historian put it, in 1924, a regional WPA field worker named Lyle Mercer recorded a conversation with an unnamed descendant of Greyhaven. The town didn't die. It folded. That's what they always said. Folded back into the trees. You don't bury it. You turn it wrong side in and forget where the crease was. The economy of Greyhaven barely functioned, but it sustained. Timber and salt licks, mostly. A few dairy lines. No school ever opened there. Children were either taught in the monastery, chapel, or more often sent away before their 10th birthday. Those who stayed were usually girls. Those who left didn't come back. And those who asked too many questions were called birth talkers, a slur for those who, in the local dialect, let wind through their teeth. In the 1850 Virginia census, the town is no longer listed, not missing, not moved, just replaced. The area that once read Greyhaven Settlement Zone had been recategorized as unaccounted land parcel, Ridge 1 to B. The land was reclassified under a fire use timber clause, even though no fire was ever officially recorded. 1. Deputy's Journal from 1851 notes, no ashes, no beams, just one black stone, warm to the touch, and no birds within earshot. They say the wind blew the hymn back on itself. But the name lingers in family Bibles, on stones that have no carving but feel arranged, and in the margins of maps that weren't supposed to exist. A preserved surveyor's sketch from 1840 shows the outline of Greyhaven, 23 residences, a church, a well, and a private sanctuary structure situated north-northeast of the main cluster. The structure is labelled with a Latin abbreviation, ARF, apparent translation, Ascensiu, Ritualis Feminae, the ritual ascension of women. No other Appalachian settlement uses this notation. Geological surveys of the area conducted in 1973 found evidence of unnatural soil disruption in a wide spiral just above the Ridge 1 to B elevation line. No tools, no rock cut, just churned dirt shaped like a giant closed eye, visible only through heat mapping infrared. The region was scheduled for development in the 1980s, but the project was pulled when 3 engineers working on the site quit without explanation. One, in a letter sent anonymously to a local paper, wrote, "There's something here. It's not ruins. It's memory with teeth. The town is remembered, not on maps, but in caution." In 1965, a 5th grade classroom in Lebanon, VA received a donation of old Appalachian storybooks from a private collector. One of the stories, untitled and handwritten, was a parable told by a child narrator. The women in white lived up high. They never slept. They whispered the names of those they didn't need anymore. And the trees loved them so much, they gave them to the dirt without hurting. The book was later removed from circulation. The collector could not be contacted again today. Hikers pass through Ridge 1 to be on their way toward Breaks Interstate Park. Most don't notice the slope, but the ones who do speak of sudden pressure in the ears, headaches, an urge to hum. One man in 2007 left a journal entry on a geocaching forum. "Felt like something was turning beneath me, like the ground was remembering." And if you stand in just the right spot, early spring, just before sunrise, some say you can hear it too. Not the wind, a voice, not 111. There's no town, no map, no welcome sign or census trail. But the trees still remember where the walls stood, the stones still warm beneath the frost, and the name Grey Haven Ridge still moves quietly between mouths that know to whisper it. Because some places don't disappear, they just close themselves, and to this day, no birds are heard. In the pines east of Ridge 1 to be no matter the season, no matter the wind. If your family once lived near a ridge with no name, if your great-grandmother warned you not to count the trees when the fog rolls in, if a childhood map in your attic has a town scratched out in pencil, but the erasure still burns, write it below. Let others remember what the hills tried to forget, and subscribe, because Grey Haven folded once, and every map you draw might be the one that opens it again. History remembers founders, deeds, stones in the ground with dates scratched across them, but it rarely remembers bloodlines that folded inward before there was St. Lillian Monastery, before the chapel ever cast its shadow over Grey Haven Ridge. There was a house, not a convent, tucked into the shale-slick hills of Clinch River Valley, a cabin with no title deed, no confirmed owner, and no clear path leading to it. In a census taken in 1814, there is a note scrawled beside a household number, in a different hand than the enumerators. 11 females, no males, all named Dunwich, all ages guessed, no mouths opened. That is the only surviving government record of the Dunwich sisters. The cabin was logged as standing on parcel to 7A, land grant originally assigned to a Revolutionary War veteran named Ephraim Hunt. Hunt's heirs later claimed they could never find the land. When a team of university archaeologists tried to locate it in 1971, they found no standing structure. But they did find 11 indentations in the soil, depressions too shallow for graves, too symmetrical for livestock bedding. One intern described them in his field notes as, like the earth had lain down and memorized their bodies. They were arranged in a circle. Family Bibles from neighboring homesteads tell fragmentary tales. In one belonging to the Pomeroy family, a penciled note from 1821 reads, "The Dunwich girls came down the mountain in winter with red fingers. Mother let them inside. They wouldn't eat, only sang, no ages, no parents. But they reappear in multiple oral accounts from that decade, always 11, always dressed the same, always whispering. A midwife named Hester Quinn, who lived 2 miles from the ridge, wrote in her weather diary, "They took the stillborn from the riverbed and folded it in their scarves, said it would remember how to breathe now. I asked which of them would name it. They said, we are all the same name. The name Eliza Dunwich first appears in a marriage registry, then crossed out in red pencil. No date, no groom. That same year the monastery foundation was laid, and the land it sat on, purchased for 1 silver coin and a blood vow taken. Beneath frost, no paperwork confirms the transfer, but a journal entry from the local notary, Luther Keene, includes this cryptic line. They sang without opening their mouths. My pen ran dry. I did not write their names. They wrote mine. Keene died that winter. His grave, though marked, is consistently overgrown, no matter the season. His headstone reads simply, he filed what should not have been opened. The sisters called themselves a concordance, not a convent. In their writings, what little survives, they refer to one another as mirrors, not individuals, but reflections of a single vow. 11 facets of the same name. The abbess, known to others as Mother Eliza, signed only with a looping, open spiral and the phrase, "Let this fold not be undone." Every known document from St. Lilian bears the same symbol, but there's another thread, quieter, darker, that links them in the Virginia State Hospital intake records from 1833. A woman named Tansy Bell was admitted for spells of silence and misplaced time. In her intake statement, she claimed, I birthed a girl. Midwife said she took the name of my dead mother, but the girl never cried, never aged. 3 years passed and she looked no different. Then the sisters came, took her without speaking, said they'd been promised. The child's name? Eliza. No last name. No confirmation this is the same girl. But Tansy died that spring, found face down in the hospital garden, arms outstretched, mouth full of pine needles. So who were the Dunwich sisters, foundlings, runaways, a bloodline unbroken by time, or something stranger, a line that loops, never branching, never dying, simply repeating itself across names and years and miles of forgotten dirt? Every community near Greyhaven told stories about women who never changed, who walked the same path year after year, who remembered you even if you didn't remember meeting them, who sang a tune that never passed from ear to mouth, only from bone to blood. In 1982, folklorist Maureen Price interviewed descendants of early settlers. One elderly woman recounted, "We never knew who birthed the first Eliza. She was just there, and every time one died, another showed up. Different face, same voice, same dream, same voice. Same dream, and always 11. Never 10, never 12. What's more chilling is what isn't recorded. No death certificates, no graves, no witness testimony of a funeral, no letters to family, only a single letter, unsigned, kept in the Appalachian. Women's Archive. We are being taken upward, not into God, into her, into the part of her that remembers the shape of prayers before language. She said, we are the folds in her gown. We make her form complete. Folded, not buried, not ascended. Worn, some believe the Dunwich sisters were part of an obscure heretical sect, pre-Christian, perhaps, who found shelter under the guise of Catholic charity. Others believe they were created, born not of parents, but of promise. A sacred mistake repeated 11 times, each version closer to perfect silence. Whatever the truth, they left no lineage, or so it seems, because in 2009, a girl named Eliza Dunwich was enrolled in a homeschooling registry outside Pound, Virginia. No mother's name, no birth certificate. She disappeared from the system a year later. And what of the bloodline? DNA evidence from a comb recovered near the ruins of St. Lilian revealed a genome sequence, markedly distinct from any other population group in the Appalachian region. Muted mitochondrial variation, suppressed telomeric aging, traits seen only in closed, non-migratory groups. In other words, the same blood, over and over, folded, repeated, refined. The sisters weren't just family, they were versions of something old, honed, and remembered only by the hills. If your family tree has a name that appears too many times, if every third daughter on your mother's side was named Eliza, and no one knows why, if your blood whispers when you walk alone near Pine, write it below, add your name to the fold, and subscribe. Because the bloodline didn't end in 1842. It simply stepped into the trees, and it may be walking back. The last documented sighting of the Sisters of St. Lilian came not from a church ledger or diocesan letter, but from a sheep farmer named Elias Clevenger, whose homestead bordered the western pine line below the ridge. His handwritten testimony, found in a crumbling issue of the Russell County Sentinel dated June 1842, describes a strange procession before dawn. They came down the hill in single file, 11 women, each bareheaded gowns, trailing in mud, hands clasped behind them. No sound, no cart, no torch, and none of them blinked. Not once. He told the reporter he recognized the tall one in front as Sister Maylene, who used to bring his youngest daughter herbal poultices during the fever seasons. But that night, Maylene didn't speak. She didn't look at him. She just walked right past the fence, right into the trees on the opposite side, and they never came back. 3 days later, Elias sent his son Harlan to the rectory in Greyhaven to report what he'd seen. The priest on duty, Father Merritt Calloway, dismissed it as superstition. The sisters are in prayer, always in prayer. What you saw was a shadow of your guilt. The Sentinel ran a small blurb anyway. Local farmer claims a vision of silent procession, church denies disruption. But that was not the only record from that week, because on May 18th, a pair of traveling missionaries, Reverend Thaddeus Moon and Sister Eunice Holbrook, arrived at the monastery gate for a scheduled catechism exchange. According to Holbrook's later journal, the gates were open, but no one answered our call. The chapel doors were ajar, all the candles melted down to stubs. We found no women inside, no food in the pantry, no signs of struggle, just rows of empty shoes in the sanctuary, 11 pairs, facing the altar. She described the chapel as oddly warm, despite the May frost. She also noted a wet wool odor lingering in the sacristy, but no mold, no decay, no rot. Moon, unnerved, reportedly refused to stay past nightfall. Holbrook, against his wishes, collected a single hymnal and one of the red-threaded habits, left folded near the altar. She never reached her next destination. Her journal was found in a dry well outside Lebanon 2 weeks later. The last line reads, "She took their voices with her and left the doors open for more." The church refused to acknowledge the disappearance publicly. But on May 27th, an internal memo was distributed from the office of Cardinal Abram St. Clair, instructing local clergy not to entertain inquiries related to Greyhaven Order 311. The memo was unsigned, but its header matched the Vatican's internal seal for anomalous ecclesiastical events, a seal typically reserved for cases involving stigmata, incorruptible bodies, or heretical relics. No investigation followed. Instead, the church sent Father Cyril Mason, a lesser-known archivist with no parish of his own, to inventory and decommission the site. His findings were never formally published, but a letter attributed to him, uncovered in the St. Louis Seminary archives, details his first night inside the monastery. They were not taken. They were not killed. They were taken out of us. That's the only way I can write it. Like pulling thread from wool, but the thread was the person, and the wool stayed behind. His final note: there is something still humming in the stone. It doesn't want to be named. It wants to be remembered. Wrong. Father Mason was later committed to Bethany Asylum for the clerically afflicted in Baltimore. He died in silence 10 years later. The event sparked quiet panic among nearby homesteads. A log entry from Ashfield Township Constable Jobin Rusk, dated June 4, 1842, records that 4 families abandoned their cabins overnight. Livestock left untethered, tools rusting in soil, bread still rising in cold ovens. Rusk writes, no sign of robbers, no signs of disease, just empty homes, except one, where every mirror had been turned to face the wall. No missing persons were ever officially reported. No property transfers filed, but the township's population dropped by 23 in that month alone. In 1843, a child was found wandering alone on Cresting Pike, near the edge of the Greyhaven Woods. No shoes, red thread tied around her left wrist. Unable to speak, but humming a tune that no local could identify. A nurse at the Little Ark shelter in Tazewell wrote the following: she does not cry, she does not sleep, but when the bells from the chapel strike 6, she gets on her knees and faces the nearest tree. No family ever came for her. She was named Lillian after the lost monastery. She disappeared a year later. Her bed was made, a spiral drawn in ash on her pillow, and yet not one official church bulletin acknowledged any of it. No press release, no parish-wide letter, no PayPal statement, only a change to the annual register of holy orders, which now lists Saint Lillian of the Spiral Grace, Order, Null, Dissolution by Ascension. No grounds for recall. To those who still live near Greyhaven Ridge, the event is rarely spoken of by name. But the avoidance speaks louder than memory. A 1971 oral history from Alberta Kitts, great-granddaughter of Elias Clevenger, recalls. Gran said the nuns didn't disappear. They turned inside out, like wool unraveling from the soul outwards. When asked why no one built over the ruins, Alberta answered, because the ground still knows their shape, and the bells. People say you can still hear them, not ringing, just humming at the base of your skull. If you stand in the clearing too long, not out loud, but in the space just before silence becomes sound. If your family ever left Russell County suddenly, if your church removed hymnals without reason, if your childhood dreams ever showed a woman with no face but 11 voices, tell us, write it in the dark where the echoes live, and subscribe, because every story sealed becomes a map unrolled. And somewhere she is still walking, backward through the pine. Witness accounts of the nuns' final weeks at St. Lillian Monastery were once scattered, misfiled, redacted, or deemed apocryphal by church historians. But among the brittle leaflets and family diaries left behind, something stranger emerges than mere silence. Something remembered out of sequence. Something passed through teeth, not pens. It begins with Dr. Silas Yule, the only physician known to have visited the monastery in the year before the disappearances. His patient log, preserved in the Russell County Archives under Yule Volume 4, Unsettled House Calls, includes 3 entries for L, Devout, S, Maylene, and E, with Grace, names not found on the convent's official roster. Yule's notes are thin, clinical, but one marginalia stands out. All 3 women presented with tremor, rash, and field sight, a term they used for seeing people in places they hadn't walked yet. One nun said her feet remembered paths her eyes had never seen. They spoke calmly, but always from the far end of the room. He wrote no follow-up. He died later that year in an asylum near Pulaski. His autopsy report is sealed. The next thread comes from a now-lost homeschool ledger recovered briefly in 1929, believed to belong to Margaret Ashcroft, a seamstress-turned-governess who had taught scripture to the novitiates at St. Lilian. The ledger found in the eaves of an abandoned farmhouse was described by local collector Derek Winslow as mostly Bible lesson plans and needlepoint patterns. But a section at the back, titled Voices Before the Quiet, included these phrases. Sister Annalise, the wind knows our names now. That's why we braid our hair at night. Sister Corintha, I had a dream of soil that hummed like bees. I woke up tasting salt. Mother Miriam, it's not the pine that moves. It's the air that forgets how to stay still. On the final page, Margaret had written only they knelt facing outward. That is not how we were taught to pray. The ledger went missing again in 1930. No photographs were ever taken. Winslow purportedly gifted it to a caller who never gave his name. In 1844, nearly 2 years after the disappearance, a child named Ephraim Thorne was institutionalized at the Little Ark, shelter after being found mute and trembling outside the original monastery gate. His only belongings were a rosary carved from cedar and a tattered hymnal with no text, just bar lines. Like empty music, a doctor's notation in the intake record reads, "He sleeps with his eyes half open and mouth stitched shut, not physically willingly, refuses food but hums for hours. Same for tones, over and over." He was 8 years old. In 1851, Ephraim briefly regained speech. A nurse named Helena Crowder recorded his only sentence. "She braided the wind through my throat." He died the next day. His body was buried without ceremony in the shelter's orchard. By 1892, a tree grew over the spot-perfect spiral in its bark. It bore no fruit. But the most haunting account came from a nun who had left the convent months before the vanishing Sister Perpetua Lenning, reassigned to a Franciscan mission in Tennessee. In a letter addressed to Mother Francesca DeLune, now kept in the Diocesan Archive of Knoxville, she wrote, "It is not right what they're hearing. It comes not in prayer, but after it, not during silence, but after the silence cracks." She recounted a night in early 1842 when Sister Maylene awoke the entire convent by walking barefoot through the halls, whispering verses that did not exist in any Bible. Sister Lenning followed her to the bell tower, where she found Maylene staring. At the forest, she was not crying. She was listening. She said the ground was singing in reverse, that its song unknotted the tongue of God. Lenning requested reassignment 3 days later. She never returned to Grey Haven, but her dreams, according to her later journal, were never her own again. She wrote, "They come in hymns with no ends, in faces I almost recognize, and every time I wake, my shoes are wet." Even local folklore carries strange echoes. In 1871, Daniel Hurst, a field chaplain for the Appalachian Railway, gave an interview to the Roanoke Pioneer about odd encounters near Russell County. He recounted a woman who flagged his cart near mile marker 44, barefoot, in red-threaded robes, speaking in a voice like wind through birch bark. She asked him what year it was. When he told her, she smiled and said, "Then I'm almost done unraveling." He turned to get his canteen. She vanished. The cart horse would not step forward for nearly 2 hours. Hurst, later dismissed as senile, never revised his story. The final witness was not a person, but a set of bells found in 1904 by a team of forestry surveyors clearing the western edge of Greyhaven Ridge. The bells were partially buried in soil, all 11 cast in iron, each one etched with a different symbol, none matching traditional Catholic iconography. When struck, the bells emitted no sound, but audio equipment brought in decades later by a short-lived university team recorded something low frequency, pulses that matched fetal heart rhythms, buried harmonics that mirrored Appalachian morning hymns, a repeated tone sequence found in early 19th century lullabies. The project was abruptly The bells were removed by state order and allegedly melted, but one field recorder remains, and it contains a file labeled simply MAYLENE_11 WAV. Some say if you play it in reverse, you hear the names. Others say you hear them waking. To this day, no official declaration has ever acknowledged these accounts. But the story persists, passed in whispers, in braids, in dreams that linger past morning. If your great-grandmother warned you not to sleep barefoot, if a hymn ever returned to your lips without knowing where it came from, if you've seen 11 birds fly in a perfect circle, only to vanish above a pine ridge, tell us, let it be known, and subscribe, because silence is a thread, and the more we pull, the more faces return from the fold. By 1843, a full year after the last recorded sighting of the Nuns of St. Lilian, the surrounding region of Russell County had already begun erasing them. No missing persons reports were ever filed, no church-issued memoranda circulated. The monastery remained on maps for another 11 years, its name changed to Greyhaven, retreat until even the ink gave up the ghost. But silence, in Appalachia, is rarely passive. The first indication of active suppression came not from priests, but from county records, or rather, what was removed from them, a 1912 clerical audit of courthouse filings in Lebanon. Virginia noted anomalous absences from the years 1841 to 1845, specifically pages 22 to 29 of the land assignment docket, covering ecclesiastical holdings near Hickory Pine Ridge, were torn at the seam, not the edge. The audit, signed by Judge Allen McAllister, was never published officially. Only a draft was found. In 1994, in the estate collection of Clerk Adeline Brinks, she'd annotated the margins. Not weather damage, intentional, paper sliced like skin. Brinks died in 1995. Her obituary lists her as longtime record keeper, never married, fond of night walks, no cause of death listed. The second silence came from the Diocese of Roanoke, when contacted in 1956 by Dr. Lillian Moffat, a religious historian researching cloistered convents in pre-Civil War Appalachia. They denied the existence of any monastery by the name of St. Lilian. Moffat, persistent and methodical, traveled to Rome to examine missionary archives in the Vatican's lesser-known Codex Acheron. which houses failed or unsanctioned sites. What she found was chilling. An ink-faded entry dated 1840 listed, "Proposed convent under order of the Sacred Remainder, Sister House, Grey Haven. Virginia initial approval granted for 12, contingent. On vow to remain unbound by civic calendar." This was later stamped revoked doctrinal noncompliance and signed in blood-red wax. No explanation. When Moffat returned home, she received a cease and desist from the Diocese of Roanoke, threatening excommunication for unauthorized pursuit of voided orders. She published nothing. Her research notes were burned by her own request before death. Only her final letter to a friend survives. They kept no time. That was the first rule. The second, no mirrors, not even in water. By the 1960s, suppression turned technological. WKRT Radio 99.1 in Norton, Virginia, attempted a Halloween segment in 1966 about forgotten female mystics of Appalachia. The segment was pre-recorded and featured the voice of folk scholar Emily Durant, who read from a reconstructed hymn attributed to the Grey Haven nuns. The segment aired at 8:10 p.m. By 8:13, the station was off the air. Engineer logs from that night detail a total failure of both analog and backup systems. Durant, interviewed the next day, was reportedly unable to speak above a whisper for 3 weeks. When asked what went wrong, she simply said, "They don't like being sung." Backwards, the FCC labeled it a power surge. But Durant moved to New Mexico. She never worked in audio again. What's more disturbing is what didn't burn in 1972. The Virginia Historical Board greenlit a documentary series titled Echoes of the Ridge, Unexplained Sites of Appalachia. One of the planned episodes, filmed under the working title The Bell Sisters of Grey Haven, made it through 2 weeks of filming near the original site by week 3. Funding was pulled. The cinematographer, Harold Gears, kept a reel labeled tape for night hymns. When later reviewed privately in 1976, the film appeared blank. No image, no audio, but anyone in the room reported the same experience. A pressure in the chest and a scent of sap and skin, like something just wept and dried. Gear went blind in one eye. The footage was shelved indefinitely. His notebook was later recovered, containing a final scrawl. "I saw her blink, but her eyes were stitched. Who taught them to do that?" And yet the most surgical act of suppression came in 1978 from within the Department of Historical Preservation itself. A leaked internal memo code, WV01432A from their Appalachian Sites Division, included a directive to reclassify non-standard ecclesiastical settlements near Grey Haven as non-existent or misattributed folklore. The directive included a list of 17 locations. St. Lillian was first. Next to it, a simple stamp, unverifiable. The final page read, "Cultural erasure is preferable to metaphysical ambiguity. Our job is memory, not invitation." To this day, no map produced after 1980 shows the trail to the original monastery grounds. The road narrows, then disappears. Even satellite imagery shows only canopy, no structure, no shadow, and yet hikers report hearing bells only once they've gone off trail. Not chimes, not wind, but a single tone, held too long, too steady, as if waiting for a reply. This isn't just censorship, it's curation of the unreal, a bureaucratic ghosting. You won't find St. Lillian on the church rolls. You won't hear the names of the sisters in the Vatican's mass registries. You won't see any plaques, any gravestones, any markers, but people keep going missing there, and a few come back changed. If your family worked in county records, if your aunt refused to pass through Russell County after sunset, if someone you knew whispered the phrase, "The ground didn't take them," like a warning, write it, let it breathe again, and subscribe, because this isn't a story. It's a recovery mission, and there are still names in the dark waiting to be said. They say the foundation's still there if you know where to look. Not on any trail, not near any marked road, but if you step off the overgrown path just past mile marker 12 on the old blue hollow logging route and walk north, listening for silence so pure it aches in your teeth, you'll find it. 3 stones, masrubed, set like vertebrae. Locals call it the spine. The first official return to the site occurred in 1987. During a geological survey following a landslide near Hickory Pine Ridge. The surveyor, Gerald Inks, filed a report to the Virginia Environmental Office describing non-registered stone footings in a geometric layout, along with anomalous electromagnetic readings and subauditory vibration. That report was later revised and filed as inconclusive. Inks, however, left a cassette tape in his field bag, now stored in the Carter County Historical Archive. On the tape, at the 43-minute mark, his voice breaks. Something's singing, but it's not in my ears. It's inside the trees. It doesn't want me to leave. It doesn't want me to leave. He did leave, but according to his wife, he never returned to the woods again. He wouldn't even light candles. In 1999, a theology student named Corinna Faith, researching Appalachian monasticism for her dissertation, visited the ridge. She stayed at a local bed and breakfast run by a woman named June Partlow, who claimed her great-grandmother once served as a cook for the Nuns of St. Lilian. Corinna never completed her research. Her last entry, preserved in a spiral notebook, donated anonymously to the University of Mary Washington, reads, "They still walk there, not with feet, not like we do, but the forest remembers the rhythm, and it gives them form." Partlow later described Corinna as changed when she returned. She reportedly stopped speaking for 3 days, only mouthing a single phrase over and over, "The pine doesn't burn. The pine doesn't burn." When asked what she meant, Corinna reportedly wept and pointed to her own shadow, whispering that one isn't mine anymore. In 2006, the most disturbing return took place. A paranormal investigation group from Charleston, calling themselves Echo Division, set out to film a YouTube documentary about Virginia's lost convent. Only one member of the team, Mark Gellert, returned. The other 2, a brother and sister pair named Jason and Nella Craft, were never found. Not dead, not missing, just absent. Mark was found wandering near an abandoned ranger station 14 miles west, barefoot and covered in dirt, with 53 pine needles inserted beneath the skin of his arms, clean, deliberate, evenly spaced. When removed, none of them left a wound. He has not spoken since. Footage from their trip was recovered from a weather-damaged camcorder. Most of it is static. But at the 1742 time stamp, there's a fragment of a hallway, or what looks like one. Stone, candle-lit. Without windows, a female voice hums. And then, faintly, a second voice, younger, hums in perfect harmony. Forensic audio confirmed the frequencies were not digital artifacts. They were real voices, to women, different registers, singing an unknown melody in 6/8 time. The only spoken words on the tape: "We are not brides. We are wombs of the ash. No one knows what it means, But the phrase has appeared again, once in a Reddit post from 2014, written by an anonymous user describing sleep paralysis after camping near the ridge, and again in a 1931 psychiatric admission file from the Ashcroft Asylum, signed by a patient claiming to be Sister M. That document was filed under dissociative identity, nonverbal, chanting, and later destroyed in a fire. The house, if it ever was a house, isn't a structure anymore. Not in the ordinary sense. Not like something you can photograph and leave. Witnesses who have visited describe it in pieces. Not like ruins, but like moments stitched into landscape. One man claims to have seen a mirror half buried in the soil, reflecting stars that weren't in the sky. Another woman spoke of a doorway without a frame, just standing there, humming slightly when she stepped close, and falling utterly silent when she said her daughter's name aloud. Others describe smells, hot milk, wax, and old paper. The distinct, sour odor of unused hymnals. No one can agree on its location, only that it moves. Not geographically, but perceptually. Like the forest gives it only to those who don't want it. There is a photograph, taken in 1983 by an amateur birdwatcher named Elliot Crane. It shows a misty clearing. Low light, heavy branches, and just left of center, a figure, not fully visible, dressed in white, bent slightly forward, at first dismissed as pareidolia. The photo was re-examined in 2001 by a digital analyst, who noted that the fog in the photo obeyed unnatural shadows, as if bending around, something that wasn't entirely there. The figure's feet do not touch the ground, and the dirt beneath it is scorched, but in the shape of a bell. Crane never returned to the area. When asked why, he said, "You don't walk where they walked unless you're willing to stay. We've spent centuries mapping cities, cataloguing borders, naming mountains. But this place, the thing we call the house, has never been mapped. Because you cannot map something that remakes itself with memory. The foundations are set, but not in stone. They're set in obedience, in repetition, in a chorus that never stops, only quiets long enough for you to believe you're alone. And if you hear it, not a scream, not a whisper, but a note held long enough to change your breath, you are already inside it. No roof, no doors, just the shape of reverence twisted into absence. If your grandmother refused to sing lullabies, if your father warned you never to bring pine needles inside, if your cousin spent a night on that ridge and hasn't spoken since Dell, us what they saw, write it below. Let it breathe in open air, and subscribe, not just to watch, but to remember, because every new voice brings the house one step closer to standing still. Patterns don't emerge all at once, they whisper. They haunt the margins. They thread themselves through disconnected stories and stretch across counties like invisible wires. If you follow the right names, the right birth dates, the right silences in census ledgers, you find the choir, not the music. The shape of the silence it left behind. The first suggestion of a recurring pattern came from a 1943 clerical reorganization document filed by the Diocese of Richmond. A section labeled Cross-Monastic Residuals listed 12 parishes marked for quiet closure between 1865 and 1901. 7 of them were located in Virginia's Appalachian Corridor. All cited insufficient postulants as reason for dissolution. But the logs didn't show failed entries or novice rejections. They showed baptisms, then nothing, no professions, no transfers, no deaths, just an identical handwritten note in 6 different books, rejoined the veil. The script matches what was found in the St. Lillian ledger. Same tremor, same ink, same hand. In 1951, genealogist Ira McClintock began compiling a record of lost women in mountain family trees. His archive, now partially digitized at the Virginia Historical Society, lists 314 women between 1800 and 1920 who disappeared from census data after age 16. No marriage records, no grave plots, no trace, more than 70% shared just for surnames. Ashcroft, Bellamy, Howard, and Durrell. McClintock, a former seminary student, noted that all four families had ancestral ties to a small Catholic movement that broke from Benedictine structures in the early 1800s. They called themselves the Brides of Quiet Light. Nothing formal, nothing canonized, just a doctrine whispered across porches and passed in handwritten gospel fragments copied from the Book of Sirach and apocryphal visions of Saint Scholastica. They believed silence was sacred, that wilderness was sacrament, and that God's true voice could only be heard in the breath between prayers. One line appears in multiple family Bibles: the veil is not worn. It is entered. School rosters tell part of the story too. Between 1912 and 1938, Dry Ridge Primary in Letcher County logged 19 different girls with the first name Lillian and middle names that matched the vanishing nuns: Agnes, Mercy, Claire, Bernadette. Every single one withdrew before age 12. Reasons listed: home relocation, illness, almost cryptically taken to the hills. County Education Board records from that era include teacher notes warning of singing in absentia, where students would hum together before the bell rang, even if no song had been introduced. In one such note, dated May 4, 1927, a teacher named Edna Hockley wrote, "The girls do not seem to speak, only sing. I asked where they'd learned the hymn. The tall one said, 'We hear it when we're still enough.' The repetition isn't just in names." In 1984, a psychiatric report surfaced from the Russell County Youth Wellness Home involving a girl named Darla H. Age 11, she was admitted for nonverbal seizures and dissociative trance states. In one recorded episode, she wrote the word ascension 53 times on the wall in crayon before collapsing. When prompted later by a therapist, she drew a house with no doors, flanked by 11 figures with no faces, all holding pine branches. Maternal grandmother, it turned out, was born Claire Du. She'd vanished from her own family's census records in 1930 only to reappear on a baptismal registry in 1938 as Sister M. Clara, then vanish again. The pattern was not just recurrence, it was inheritance, like trauma passed by lullaby.in. 1972, a local historian named Rebecca Shires compiled a pamphlet for the bicentennial of Hickory Falls, a nearby settlement whose original chapel was burned in 1844 under unknown circumstances. In her research, she discovered a family prayer book belonging to the town's founding matriarch, Miriam Ashcroft, dated 1839. Inside was a hymn titled "The Unseen Bridegroom," with lyrics identical to those humming on the Echo Division tape, recovered in 2006. But what's most disturbing is this: the melody predates the hymn's appearance by 26 years. It's encoded in shape note notation in a forgotten Appalachian folk tune called Cumberland's Prayer, archived by Alan Lomax in a 1934 field recording from Lee County. The woman singing it was 94 years old. She claimed her grandmother sang it to her to stop the girls from following the pine smoke. Same notes, same rhythm, different words, but the pattern holds: a song, a a shadow, a silence. The veil was never cloth. The convent was never walls. It was behavior, taught, hidden, passed, like a virus that didn't kill but changed the soul. Families erased daughters and called them joined. Villagers buried missing girls in euphemisms and psalms. Churches closed their books and whispered it was their calling. And the hills they watched. They learned the ritual better than any chapel. If your great-grandmother's Bible has pages glued together, if your family tree has missing branches with the word ascended in the margin, if you were taught a hymn no one else remembers, tell us, let it out, and subscribe, because every thread added helps us stitch the veil back wide enough to see through. You'd think something like this would stay buried, that, with time, with modern light, the shadows would vanish. But something that was never truly dead doesn't rise. It echoes. In 2021. A teacher at Red Pine Elementary, located in the shadow of where St. Lillian's once stood, filed an unusual report. A second-grade girl named Marcianne Haskins had begun drawing wedding pictures of herself in a long grey veil. Not white, not floral. A veil that draped her face entirely in graphite smudge. Her figures were always drawn in the woods, but never on the ground. They floated. The teacher, Miriam Cole, asked Marcy why the girls weren't standing. Because they don't touch dirt anymore, she replied. The school flagged the images for psychological evaluation, but the Haskins family withdrew Marcy before a counselor could follow up. Her last known drawing was taped to the back of her locker door. 11 girls, each with a number where their face should be, and one written message: "We come when the bells stop." It wasn't the only one. In summer 2022, a Reddit post in the Appalachian Folklore Forum asked, "Has anyone else heard women humming in the Pine Hills near Russell County? I thought I was losing my mind, but my daughter started humming the same song 2 days later." The thread was deleted within 48 hours, but not before it gathered 213 comments. Most anonymous, one wrote, "My cousin used to say her sister left to marry the forest. She disappeared in 1998. Everyone just said she got into drugs, but she left her shoes by the trees." Another, "Check your great-grandma's hymn book. Look under the name Cumberland's Bride. My family burned ours. The return isn't always loud. Sometimes it hums through a cracked window in the night. Sometimes it stirs in the pine smoke from a distant hill fire. But in certain homes, across certain ridges, it's being taught again in 2023. A woman named Lillian McRae was briefly institutionalized at the Cedar Hollow Regional Clinic for what doctors listed as chronic fugue states with religious delusion. She claimed to hear 11 voices in harmony, calling her back to the vow. When shown a photo of the missing St. Lillian nuns, aged, grainy, reprinted in a local pamphlet, she pointed at the youngest and said, "That was me, the first." Time. McRae's birth certificate shows she was born in 1986, but her baptismal record, it was filed in 1891 under the name Clara Agnes Dura, the same name listed in the scorched monastery ledger found in Russell County. Her family history, when traced, leads back to the Ashcroft bloodline. There are names that shouldn't be said aloud, and there are melodies you should never repeat. But the hills don't forget either. Locals near Wolf Creek reported a cluster of dead crows found, nailed to trees in October 2023. Each was positioned in a triangle around a pine grove. Beneath them, 11 sets of footprints, all bare. No adult shoes nearby, no camping permits. The ground was too soft to track further. A month later, A park ranger's log entry for 7B noted hearing what he called a chapel hymn sung in thirds around 4:11 a.m. He turned off his radio, thinking it was interference. But when he returned to his truck, 3 pine branches had been laid in the shape of a veil across the windshield. He left the Forest Service 2 weeks later. No statement given. They say the veil is being walked again. A child in Lee County was heard reciting verses not found in any standard Bible. Her grandmother said they'd been passed down in lullabies. Verses warning not to follow barefoot girls into the thicket. Thus some brides don't marry men, they marry silence. Another report came from a hospice. Nurse in 2024, her patient 292, non-verbal for 5 years, began humming on the night of a thunderstorm. The nurse recognized the tune from old folk recordings. She looked into the patient's genealogy. Her mother, a missing postulant from 1911, her baptismal sponsor, one sister M. Bernadette. So why is it returning? Because silence, once taught, never truly dies. Because pain buried by prayer is still pain. Because the forest keeps its own books. Because when memory is forbidden, it becomes ritual. These girls, these women, these names we find scribbled in the margins of ledgers. They were not forgotten. They were archived by something older than government. The bells don't ring anymore in Russell County. The old chapel ruins are gone. But sometimes, hikers report standing still, just for a second, and hearing a hum that feels like it's inside their ribs. They call it wind. They call it old electricity in the wires. But every time someone says, "I think I saw something," they never say what. They just look toward the trees and stop walking. If your child has ever drawn 11 girls and said nothing about it, if your dreams return you to a forest you've never been to, if a hymn has followed you through generations, tell us, write it below, and subscribe, because this isn't a legend, it's a liturgy, and every voice brings another vow back into the light. The most dangerous thing about old stories isn't their blood, it's their names. A place can forget what happened. A person can lie about what they saw, but a name is a kind of spell, a key that unlocks something buried, not just in memory, but in the soil itself. And one name keeps returning: Lillian Ashcroft. It was first listed in the 1842 monastery ledger as the youngest member of the novitiate, 14 years old. The entry next to her name reads, "Veil taken in. Silence, eyes closed by will, bound by the vow." But that should have been the end. A child given a new name in service of God, a lifetime spent cloistered, perhaps an a quiet death, unknown to most. Only that's not what happened. The same name appears in a 1903 deposition regarding missing land tax payments on a structure, known only as Parcel 47, Mountain Vale Settlement. When the assessor inquired who was responsible for the abandoned nunnery's remains, the only name in the ledger was L. Ashcroft, caretaker of memory, signed in handwriting identical to the 1842 record. Curved L slanted A, a half-crossed T that bleeds down into the next line. Handwriting experts later compared both documents in a 1989 local genealogy conference in Charlottesville. Conclusion: the signatures matched exactly. Pressure, tilt, style. No variation. How does a girl born in 1828 sign a legal tax form 75 years later? In 1955, an emergency room nurse in Wise County logged an unusual entry. Female, mid-30s, arrived barefoot. No identification. Gown of old textile. Repeated, same. Name on loop. Lillian Ashcroft. She vanished from the hospital that night. No exit footage. No discharge form. Only the hospital record remains, and the gown she left behind. Stitched in the lining, speak only when the trees allow. In 1977, a Sister Mary Clarice of the St. Cecilia Order submitted an internal report to her archdiocese. She claimed a woman visited her at dusk asking to be revowed. The woman knew prayers that had been outlawed in 1893. She spoke Latin phrases only used by the first Benedictine. Convents and one name again and again, Ashcroft. The nun was silenced by order of the church. The report was sealed until 2004, when a fire destroyed the diocesan archive. No record of the visitor's identity survives, except one sketch found among the charred pages, a veil stitched with a black cross of thorns, and a single note, written at the bottom. They are memory now. They do not age. They do not forget. The name began showing up online in the late 2000s. One user, on a closed message board, described a recurring dream of a girl in a grey dress whispering her name backwards. Another claimed their daughter, only 3, wrote Lillian Ashcroft in chalk across her bedroom wall, though she had never heard it spoken aloud. In 2015, a Facebook group dedicated to Appalachian religious history posted a photograph of a ruined grave marker found in the woods near Pine Hollow. The stone bore only a first initial and a faint cross above the dot. The caption read, "Possibly Ashcroft. My grandma said we don't say that name near the trees." The post was removed within an hour. The page was deleted the following day. The handwriting persists. In 2021, a West Virginia librarian working on a digitization project of 19th century asylum documents came across a patient intake form from 1881. The form listed no name, only the following scrawl in the margin: "She belongs to Ashcroft now." The ink was not from that century. Lab analysis revealed synthetic compounds only found in modern pens, the kind manufactured after 1980, and yet the document had never been removed from its archival sleeve. It was as if the handwriting had appeared later or had always been there, waiting. Even now, in 2025, stories continue to surface. A teacher in Lee County found the name etched into the underside of a school desk. When sanded away, it reappeared 2 days later, this time accompanied by 11 tick marks and a crescent moon. A man restoring an old steeple near Russell County found a slip of paper behind the altar. Written on it was a prayer, but not in any known liturgical structure. A kind of chant, repeated, "Remember the name and forget yourself." And in the corner, signed again, L.A. So what does it mean? Why does this name outlive its origin? Because it was never just a name. It was a vow, a contract, a title, passed from woman to woman, body to body, like a forgotten rite. To speak it aloud is not to honor history, it's to wake it. And every time, it's written in a margin, on a stone, inside a hymnal. No one sings from any more. The record shifts. New ink appears. Old entries vanish. It rewrites. It folds the past over the present like pressed linen. The sisters were never meant to be saints. They were keepers of silence, and silence, when broken, echoes by name. If you've seen that signature, if the name Lillian Ashcroft rings through your family line, if you've ever woken up humming and not known the tune, tell us. Leave your words below and subscribe, because some names rewrite more than memory. They rewrite you. You won't find it on any modern map. Not under St. Lilian Monastery. Not under Mountain Vale Settlement. The trail marker simply says, closed, no entry past mile 3, soil instability. But hikers still go, and some don't finish. The Loop, in April of 2024, a volunteer trail conservationist named Delaney Marsh submitted a routine log noting soil collapse near an abandoned structure off an unregistered spur path. She included a GPS coordinate. The next day, that entry vanished from the public record, but a screenshot was saved and circulated through local Facebook groups before being flagged and removed. The coordinate led to an open foundation stone, octagonal, overgrown with pine. Centered in the ruins was a shallow depression, like a drained baptismal font. Inside, burned parchment, a rosary twisted around itself with 11 loops instead of 10, and a single linen shoe, child-sized, embroidered at the heel with 2 letters, L-A-W-E. Weren't supposed to dig this deep. That much is clear. The Church has issued no official statements since 2006, when a copy of the sealed Litany of Ascensions surfaced at a religious estate sale in Abingdon, Virginia. A book once declared apocryphal, now privately recalled. Its final page reads, "And the 11 shall walk, never claimed by time. They are not lost. They are memory. Memory. It's what binds this story together and what undoes it. From the burned pages in courthouse walls to children whispering names in sleep. From a convent with no surviving sisters to a woman signing the same name across 180 years. What were they keeping hidden? And what was buried beneath the word ascension? There's one more piece. A field audio tape labeled Ashcroft Inquiry. Copy 1/3 was recovered in 1983 by a researcher, cataloging folklore for the Virginia State Archive. The tape had no metadata, but the voice belonged to local historian Florence Easley, who died 3 days after the recording. Her home burned in what was called a fuse box failure. Here's the final minute of that tape, transcribed, and if you go up there, you'll find no bodies, no stone markers, just wind, just birdsong cut short, and the feeling that something old is watching from inside the trees. That's where they went. Not to heaven, not to earth, but to the space we made for them when we forgot their names. And then the tape clicks off. There is no ending to a story like this, only layers. Some claim the 11 nuns were victims of mass hysteria. Some say they were punished for a doctrine no man could understand. Others say they became something else, but all we know is this. The name persists. The site resists excavation. And every document that dares list the 11 vanishes, ink faded, page torn, metadata corrupted. Even this video may not remain up long. We weren't meant to know. This dot, but if you do, if your grandmother had an old hymnal with names blacked out, if you've stood at mile marker 3 and heard singing through the pine, if your dreams end in silence that tastes like iron and smells like lavender, then write it, seal your name, in the comments, and subscribe. Because memory alone doesn't protect the truth. It takes witnesses. And maybe that's what they were waiting for. It began with a drawer that shouldn't have opened, in the basement of the Russell County courthouse, beneath a warping staircase, behind a row of mislabeled land claims from 1835. An archival clerk named Thomas Wren pulled out a box he'd never seen before. The box was wrapped in wax paper, tied shut with an antique rosary knotted at the crucifix. A handwritten label in fading brown ink simply read, Ascension Transfer -1842. No filing code, no docket number, no entry in the building's logbook. Inside, Thomas found only 5 objects: a scorched page from a monastery ledger, the ink blackened, curling at the edges as if it had burned from within, a loose sheriff's field note, unsigned, written in the hasty block letters of someone writing faster than they could think. Lists of 11 names, all identical: Sister Elisa and Sister Elisa. A crumbling brocade scapular with a blood-stained hem and written in graphite at the edge of the sheriff's note. A line that has never left the vault of Appalachian folklore since. The sisters walked into the pines and did not return. The ground didn't take them, it let them go. The town of Castlewood, Virginia, had long whispered of the St. Lilian Monastery, built in 1823 and operated without official diocesan oversight. The monastery stood on a ridge 2 miles east of Greyhaven, an unincorporated coal route settlement that by 1850 had vanished from state maps. It was described by travelers as a quiet stone place without windows, no church bells, no parish, no known priest. What made St. Lilian's unusual wasn't just its remoteness. It was the sisters themselves. Every nun recorded in the original deed, sealed under the name of the Dunwich family, was adopted from the same household. 11 women, all raised in the same cabin in Clinch River Valley. No parents listed, no baptismal records, all taken in by the church in 1824 under a mass conversion form called the Oath of Obedience. A copy of this oath exists in fragments, and it ends not with amen, but with the phrase, "Let my feet follow the song of her silence. Let my name fold where no grave can carry it." By the spring of 1842, no correspondence had been received from St. Lilian's in over 8 months. The last known visitor, a supply courier named Joseph Albee, filed a report noting strange behavior among the sisters. He wrote, "They no longer speak aloud. They walk in unison." The younger ones stared into the root cellar and said it was opening again. I asked who opens it. She replied, "She does, when we stop humming." That would be the last report from anyone outside the order. On December 12, 1842, a bishop from Richmond was sent to investigate. His name has since been erased from diocesan records. His carriage was reported arriving in Castlewood, but never left. According to a now-buried article in the Richmond Times Chronicle, the monastery was discovered empty. 11 rooms, 11 beds, 11 plates left uneaten on the table, 1 staircase scorched from underneath, no bodies, no notes, no evidence of departure, and on the wall of the inner chapel, a single phrase burned into the stone: "We have gone up." What followed was a purge of silence. All official documents regarding the monastery were recalled by the church. The property was quietly seized. The land resold for less than $1 to a logging company. Within 10 years, the monastery was flattened by what official records call a wind collapse. But blueprints recovered in 1961 suggest there was no steeple, no elevated roof, no structural flaw that could explain collapse. There are no burial records for the sisters, no reassignments, no obituaries, but in one handwritten letter from a dying nun at the Sisters of Mercy convent in Roanoke, dated 1856, we find this cryptic sentence: "We gave them the hill, she gave them the hill, she no name, just she more." Unsettling, perhaps, is the uniformity of the names on the scorched monastery ledger. 11 entries, all dated December 11th, 1842, all signed Sister Eliza, same signature, same hand. For years, researchers believed this to be a clerical error, or perhaps the name of the abbess repeated across the page. But handwriting analysis from 1984 revealed minute differences in line pressure and spacing. 11 near-identical signatures, written by different hands. None of them match the abbess's known script. Then there is the sheriff's field note. Filing date, March 3, 1843. Filed under property transfer, religious exception. The deputy, unnamed, wrote the following: was sent to inventory the belongings of St. Lillian's. No living soul inside. Chapel cool to the touch, despite fire marks. Found all shoes missing. Found cloaks lined up near forest edge. 11 total, all with names crossed out in red wax. Something in the trees was humming. Not wind, not animal, a woman's voice. From above me, I did not go in. I do not want to see where they went. No follow-up investigation was ordered. The file was marked closed. In the decades that followed, Castlewood's population dwindled. The forest grew dense around the foundation. Of the monastery, hunters reported finding empty habits hanging from low branches. Children whispered stories of the sisters who folded, women who walked into the hills each winter to keep the valley safe. By the time the Civil War reached Virginia, no one remembered the name St. Lillian, except for one family in a genealogy log kept by the Pomeroy family who lived just north of the ridge. A note beside an 1832 birth reads, Martha, not baptized, taken by the Silent Sisters, promised return in a dream. Martha never reappeared, but her name was found etched in the stone foundation beneath the monastery chapel. Next to it, written upside down in red chalk, folded, not buried. To this day, no gravestone marks the passing of the 11 nuns. No official acknowledgement of their order remains in the church's national registry. Even their monastery appears only once in Virginia land deeds, a single line, sealed with a symbol no historian has successfully translated, a pair of open hands, palms upward, encircled by 11 stars. But some say you can still hear them when the fog settles low on the pines, when the wind hums in a pattern, not a gust, when you find yourself turning to count something and forget what number you started at. They say the sisters didn't vanish. They say they were taken up, but not to heaven, something older, something the church couldn't contain, so it let the mountain keep them. If your family speaks of a convent no one could find twice, if your grandmother warned you about women in the pines who don't leave footprints, if you've ever woken humming a tune you don't remember, learning, write it below. Let your words join the record they tried to destroy. And subscribe, because even this story might vanish tomorrow, and if it does, you'll know why. You won't find Greyhaven Ridge on a map today. It's not there, not on satellite imagery, not in the Virginia property archives, not in the county plats redrawn after the Civil War, but we know it existed. Not because of what's visible, but because of what keeps being erased in the 1836 land tax rolls. Greyhaven was listed as a permissive settlement zone, a term used for religiously affiliated communities allowed to claim and occupy land outside formal state surveying districts. These zones were usually plotted on marginal land, ridgelines, floodplains, coal spoil, places the state didn't want but couldn't stop people from inhabiting. Greyhaven was one of these places, built into the shale of Russell County's eastern ridge, hemmed in by ancient pine, fog-wet soil, and deer trails no hunter ever admitted to walking twice. According to the 1837 Valley Watch Almanac, the population peaked at just under 300. Loggers, masons, widowed mothers, and those referred to as bonded to the cloth. These bonded citizens were associated with St. Lilian Monastery, an unmarked religious site founded by Mother Eliza Dunwich and maintained by the self-styled Silent Order of the Folded Mercy. No mail routes, no registered postmaster, no rail extension, only one road, Ridgeline 3, to be known to locals as the Tongue. Locals say the town breathed like a body, quiet, distant, and always turning inward. Houses were built with no windows facing the monastery. Doors opened away from the chapel spire, and every home kept a single chair facing east, in case the sisters came back through. As one oral historian put it, in 1924, a regional WPA fieldworker named Lyle Mercer recorded a conversation with an unnamed descendant of Greyhaven. The town didn't die. It folded. That's what they always said. Folded back into the trees. You don't bury it. You turn it wrong side in and forget where the crease was. The economy of Greyhaven barely functioned, but it sustained. Timber and salt licks, mostly. A few dairy lines. No school ever opened there. Children were either taught in the monastery, chapel, or more often sent away before their 10th birthday. Those who stayed were usually girls. Those who left didn't come back. And those who asked too many questions were called bird talkers, a slur for those who, in the local dialect, let wind through their teeth. In the 1850 Virginia census, the town is no longer listed, not missing, not moved, just replaced. The area that once read Greyhaven Settlement Zone had been recategorized as unaccounted land parcel, Ridge 1 to B. The land was reclassified under a fire use timber clause, even though no fire was ever officially recorded. 1. Deputy's Journal from 1851 notes, no ashes, no beams, just one black stone, warm to the touch, and no birds within earshot. They say the wind blew the hymn back on itself. But the name lingers in family Bibles, on stones that have no carving but feel arranged, and in the margins of maps that weren't supposed to exist. A preserved surveyor's sketch from 1840 shows the outline of Greyhaven, 23 residences, a church, a well, and a private sanctuary structure situated north-northeast of the main cluster. The structure is labelled with a Latin abbreviation, ARF, apparent translation, Ascensiu, Ritualis Feminae, the ritual ascension of women. No other Appalachian settlement uses this notation. Geological surveys of the area conducted in 1973 found evidence of unnatural soil disruption in a wide spiral just above the Ridge 1 to B elevation line. No tools, no rock cuts, just churned dirt shaped like a giant closed eye, visible only through heat mapping infrared. The region was scheduled for development in the 1980s, but the project was pulled when 3 engineers working on the site quit without explanation. One, in a letter sent anonymously to a local paper, wrote, "There's something here. It's not ruins. It's memory with teeth. The town is remembered, not on maps, but in caution." In 1965, a 5th grade classroom in Lebanon, VA received a donation of old Appalachian storybooks from a private collector. One of the stories, untitled and handwritten, was a parable told by a child narrator. The women in white lived up high. They never slept. They whispered the names of those they didn't need anymore. And the trees loved them so much, they gave them to the dirt without hurting. The book was later removed from circulation. The collector could not be contacted again today. Hikers pass through Ridge 1 to be on their way toward Breaks Interstate Park. Most don't notice the slope, But the ones who do speak of sudden pressure in the ears, headaches, an urge to hum. One man in 2007 left a journal entry on a geocaching forum. Felt like something was turning beneath me, like the ground was remembering. And if you stand in just the right spot, early spring, just before sunrise, some say you can hear it too. Not the wind, a voice, not 111. There's no town, no map, no welcome sign or census trail. But the trees still remember where the walls stood, the stones still warm beneath the frost, and the name Grey Haven Ridge still moves quietly between mouths that know to whisper it. Because some places don't disappear, they just close themselves, and to this day no birds are heard. In the pines east of Ridge 1 to be, no matter the season, no matter the wind. If your family once lived near a ridge with no name, if your great-grandmother warned you not to count the trees when the fog rolls in, if a childhood map in your attic has a town scratched out in pencil, but the erasure still burns, write it below. Let others remember what the hills tried to forget, and subscribe, because Grey Haven folded once, and every map you draw might be the one that opens it again.